Good morning, or afternoon, or evening, whenever you might be watching and listening to this video. I'm Pastor Nanette Christofferson, and along with Pastor Steve Talmadge, we offer these short video Bible lessons on the lectionary reading for the week. And this week and this year, we are in lectionary year B and in Pentecost week 6. And our Old Testament reading comes from Lamentations chapter 3, 22 to 33. So let's start off by reading this passage right away. The steadfast love of the Lord never ceases. His mercies never come to an end. They are new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The Lord is my portion, says my soul. Therefore, I will hope in him. The Lord is good to those who wait for him, to the soul that seeks him. It is good that one should wait quietly for the salvation of the Lord. It is good for one to bear the yoke in youth, to sit alone in silence when the Lord has imposed it, to put one's mouth to the dust. There may yet be hope, to give one's cheek to the smiter, and be filled with insults. For the Lord will not reject forever. Although he causes grief, he will not have compassion according to the abundance of his steadfast love. For he does not willingly afflict or grieve anyone. As we look to this book, it was written during the devastating time of the takeover of the Babylonian Empire. And so I'm going to start with this question. What if everything you relied upon for your security, comfort, identity, sense of God's presence, and hope in the future simply vanished overnight? The book of Lamentations was written by and for people who had survived an unimaginable trauma with personal, political, social, and theological dimensions. For the residents of Jerusalem, for the Israelites in 587 BCE, who watched the Babylonians smash the walls of Jerusalem, burn down the temple, knock down the houses of the city, and execute the Davidic royal family, the world seemed to lose all sense of order and coherence. Life suddenly felt chaotic, brutal, meaningless, and hopeless. These emotions and the questions that arose from the traumatic destruction of Jerusalem are reflected in the book of Lamentations. So as you read it, you can begin to understand why the people are lamenting in the way that they are. It would be like if, for us, all of a sudden everything was decimated in maybe our own church, but maybe in a bigger picture in our nation. And everything that we thought we could rely on now seems hopeless. Lamentations is a book that's also a witness to suffering. Kathleen O'Connor interprets the text by stating, "The book of Lamentations as a whole offers a theology of witnessing to suffering. In contemporary American culture, at least, the expression of pain and suffering is often seen as embarrassing, weak, and even tacky. If something is wrong, then many of us want to know how to fix it and then forget about it. Asking someone else to hear about our pain in detail is considered selfish and cringeworthy. We should grin and bear the pain instead, especially in Christian communities, where the triumph of Christ's resurrection often serves as a trump card to force people to rejoice, or the call of Christ to carry our crosses serves to halt any conversation about the pain of our suffering." But Lamentations asks us to sit with grief, either ours or someone else's, and give ourselves time to feel its texture, weight, and shape. Most of us don't like this uncomfortable feeling of feeling the texture, weight, and shape of grief. And our culture, like was mentioned, just tells us to basically get over it. But grief doesn't work like that. You can't just get over it. This poem unashamedly ascribes the horror directly to God. Now, we'll talk about this in just a minute. In the second bullet point here, it says, however, we modern believers adjudicate that ancient belief. Whether we believe God causes such pains or not, we can agree with the ancients that in life, chaos always threatens the order of things. Death is ever ready to swallow life. These texts will not help us argue the origins of the world's agonies, but they will help us reflect on what we can do to face them and live them with their reality. This may be the most important lesson we need to learn. When hopelessness seems complete, the singer cries, "Gone is my glory, and all that I had hoped for from the Lord." As we go back to the top bullet point, Lamentations begins in chapter 3 with, "I am the warrior who has seen the woe by means of the anger of God's rod. God has brought Jerusalem's disaster," and the succeeding 19 verses find the subject of their actions to be God alone. And like I said earlier, we don't necessarily adjudicate that kind of theology or that ancient belief. For we also have to look to ourselves and our own sin and our sinful nature of ourselves and our want and desire for power, desire to be right, and our desire for greed. And there's a lot of things involved here, but that the ancients, it was easier for them to understand that God brought this onto them than maybe some of it bringing it on by themselves or to themselves. Our text provides crucial ideas for living with the agonies of life. The first word of verse 22 is central. It is the plural form of the Hebrew word chesed, a word notoriously difficult to translate. It might read, unbreakable devotion to the promise. Chesed best defines the basic nature of God as that wonderful sense with Moses on Mount Sinai in Exodus 34:6 makes plain. But the fact that chesed is the plural suggests it is not some generalized, unspecified good feeling, but rather actual deeds that reveal the realities of unbreakable devotion. Verse 22 reads, "The steadfast love, chesed, of the Lord never ceases." Although the Hebrew text might be better read, the steadfast deeds of the Lord, we will never be cut off. I used a picture here that showed layers because chesed is one of those words that is heavily layered, and you see it used in the book of Ruth as well, and you'll see it used throughout the Old Testament. Really is meaning God's steadfast love, but then you peel back and it's about God's steadfast mercy, and you peel back again and it's about God's steadfast compassion, and then you peel back again, not only God's steadfast love, but his love for his people. It is layered with lots of different meanings and meanings that all kind of mean the same thing about God's graciousness and God's steadfast love. And these are words that bring just huge comfort to the ancients, but also to us today as well. God's mercies never come to an end. Remarkably, the word mercy is based on the Hebrew word for womb. When the poets reached for a word to best describe the astonishing mercy of God, they fastened on a woman's womb, imagining God's love to be like that unique love shared by a woman for her child. In the midst of life's certain pains, we must fix our minds on the unbreakable and active womb love of our God. Only in that love will we find hope in our hopelessness, the promise of joy in our sorrows. Verse 23 reminds us that this unbreakable love, expressed in deeds of mercy, is new every morning. Great is your faithfulness. The 1923 hymn, "Great is Thy Faithfulness," beautifully captures the wonder of these convictions about God in stirring word and tune. So laments help the soul recognize God. My hope is in God because the Lord is my portion, sings verse 24. The poet's history with God has convinced the singer that God is in fact fully present, even in the deepest despair. Faithful waiting is justified. Silence in the face of realities, however difficult, suggests that accepting the situation for what it is can be the first step to wholeness and renewed hope. For the Lord will not reject forever. However dark the night, however deep the fear, however hopeless the situation, we rely on the steadfast love of God and give ourselves over to the one who is always the source of our hope. Great is God's faithfulness indeed. As we move on to the questions, I would like to ask you, are laments helpful? Have you ever even read Lamentations? And I would encourage you to do that. And if laments are helpful, why or why wouldn't they be? And I think personally, for me, laments have been very helpful. They've been helpful because 3,000 years ago, people were experiencing some of the same griefs, the pains, the agonies of humankind, of things that many of us endure. And it makes, for me, it helps me to know that I'm not the only one and that I can lament. And usually my laments turn into hope, very similar to Psalms. But the second question is what happens when we get stuck in a lament? And this is when they are not helpful, because when we get stuck in our grief and stuck in our sorrow, we can't move on. It just becomes this wheel that just keeps perpetuating itself. And we can't move ahead and see the hope and the hopefulness that God has intended for us in this life for us today. And then the last question is, could these laments still apply to our world? And I think I kind of answered that in the first question. But, war hasn't stopped. And people tormenting others because they want to be right, or their way is right, or they want this land, or the greed, they want the power. All of these apply to our world today. All of these laments, we can feel as if God has abandoned us. But as the lamentist at the very end lets us know, great is God's faithfulness, great is God's hesed, great is God's love for the world. And to remember that and to find great hope in that. I would encourage you this week to write a lament in your devotion time. Stop and pause. And oftentimes when I write a lament, I become even more aware of the things that I'm grieving, the sorrows that I have, and helping articulate them helps me in my prayer life as well. And also by articulating them, I can turn to God and know that the hope that we have in Jesus Christ, our world is still, God is still working on our world. God is still in our despair and will always be. So I encourage you to write your own lament this week. The resources I use this week come from Brennan Breed, from his 2021 commentary. I also use John Holbrook, 2009 commentary, and then Kathleen O'Connor, her book on Lamentations and the Tears of the World was also used. I'd like to encourage you to stay nice and cool, encourage you to write a lament, and blessings on your week.